stable. Keep the way clean, there's nothing between. Nothing between like worldly pleasures, and it's of life the harmless they seem. Must not my heart from him ever sever? He is my all, there's nothing between. Nothing between my soul and my Savior, so that his blessed face may be seen. Nothing preventing the least of his favor. Keep the way clear, let nothing between. Nothing between, if many hard trials, though the whole world against me convene, watching with prayer and much self-denial, triumph at last with nothing between. Nothing between my soul and my Savior, so that his blessed face may be seen. Nothing preventing the least of his favor. Keep the way clear, let nothing between.
Good afternoon. Good to see you all again. I thought it was. It has a green light. So I don't know. Did I disconnect it? Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Let's have a short word of prayer, and we'll start. Our Father, I ask that this would be helpful. It would be simple, applicable, useful. In Jesus' name, amen. So, now I had handed out a little booklet last night, and if someone did not get one, I have more. Is there anyone that would like to have one of these? It's a summary of basically what I've been teaching. Okay. Oh, in the back. Give you this one here. There you go, ma'am. Okay. So here's how I envision the afternoon going. The first session will be on poetry, and the second one, I'm leaving it open because I want to practice either something that you have in mind or one of you has in mind, or I can always pick some chapter or story or something. The thing is that it's useful to teach these ideas, but where it really gets cemented is when you practice it. I remember a quote from Bruce Lee, apparently. I don't know if it's actually from him, but somebody labeled it. He said, "I do not fear the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks one time, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." Now, we're not trying to hurt anyone here, but the same idea applies. If you practice one thing enough, you get really good at it, and then it becomes a useful tool. And my fear always with these seminars is that, you teach all these different stuff, and then you don't actually practice it very deeply. So that's what I'd like to do for the second session, is practice something, preferably of interest to one of you all, but I can pick stuff too. So, poetry. Now, this particular topic is probably the most different out of all the ones that I teach, because it's not so much informational. Really, it's just learning how to read it properly. Because when I first started reading the Bible, I didn't even know that there was poetry in the Bible. I just see things like the Psalms, and they're in like awkward little paragraphs based on the type of Bible you're using, and I wasn't even aware. But once I became aware, the Psalms and the Proverbs and the book of Job and Isaiah, those all became a lot easier to read because now I understood why it was written that way. So this is just to help you get into it, clear the clutter out of the way and really get to the heart of what that poem is trying to say. So, now, the poems in the Bible revolve around an idea called parallelism. Now, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or at least we don't do this in our poetry today. Our poetry, unless you're a more modern poet where they just kind of chucked all the rules out the window, is based largely on two things. One is the meter, and two is rhyming schemes. So the example I like to use, because it's something everyone knows, is the song Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. It has seven syllables, so to speak, in each line. How I wonder what you are. And that's another 7. And then the 2 lines, they rhyme. And then the next set of 2 lines, those rhyme. That's our regular concept of poetry. Hebrews, nope, that's not their concept of poetry. They don't focus on rhyming stuff, and they don't focus on syllables. What Hebrews do is they rhyme ideas. They will give the same idea several times in different words. A great place to see it, and the one we're going to look at the most, is Psalm 1. One of my favorite psalms, and not just because it's the first one. Psalm 1. Now, I'm going to write out the first verse on the board, but I'm going to arrange it in the way that the Hebrews think, so to speak, at least my understanding of it. So we have verse 1. Okay, so we have, blessed is the man, I'm going to skip a line, that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Okay. So I've divided this up a little bit, and you'll see why pretty quick. I'm going to switch colors here. Okay. Watch this. Walketh, standeth, sitteth. Similar idea. You're doing something. Counsel of the ungodly, way of sinners, seed of the scornful. Same idea. Do you see the parallel structure in these 3 lines? It's giving the same idea 3 different ways. That is a large part of Hebrew poetry. Now, when I see this, the first thing I really try to do then is figure out, well, what idea is it repeating? And this, I guess it's kind of obvious. Blessed is the man who doesn't do what sinners do. Whether it's walking with them, standing with them, sitting with them, taking their advice, wherever they sit, they do not connect with them. It's just the poet wanted to say it in a more beautiful way than, blessed is the guy that avoids sinners. So he expands on it. He makes poetry out of it. He makes it beautiful. But it's a really simple idea when you get down to the heart of it. Make sense? Now, this particular type of parallelism, because there's 3 of them, and they all have names. I don't really care about the names, but I'll just tell you them just to tell you. This is known as synonymous. You know the word synonym? 2 words that mean the same thing? That's why it's called synonymous. The lines are synonyms. They mean the same thing. And so they call it that. But again, that's not going to be on the test. It's just for your personal knowledge if you care. Huh? Oh, no. The test of life. I don't think you're going to have anyone ask you, what is the official title of this particular form of parallelism, Okay, so I'm going to wipe out verse 1. Pretty obvious there. Let's go to verse 2. Okay, verse 2. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you. These are your 2 parallel lines. Same idea, 2 different ways. What things are parallel between these 2 lines? God's law. Okay, so the law of the Lord and his law. Good. What else?
The verbs.
The verbs?
Or the noun and verb. Delight and meditate.
Okay, so we have delight, and you could say, let's just include the whole thing there, because you're not going to meditate on something that you hate day and night, So, okay. Yes?
My friend was not here last night.
Then she gets a book. There you go. Yes, that will save you time writing notes. So, yes. So, you can see very plainly, these 2 things say the same thing twice. Now, what is the basic idea then of verse 2? If you had to put it in your own words.
He loves God's law.
Aha! Yes. So, verse 1 is like, blessed is the man that stays away from sinners. Verse 2, he loves God's law. That's a good summary. You can tell that the poem gets a whole lot shorter and easier to understand when you do that, when you really look at it that way. Excellent. By the way, do you notice how these crossed? You had delight first and then law of the Lord and then his law and meditates. That is another common feature of Hebrew poetry. It's called a chiasm. Just to explain, chi or chi was the Greek letter X. And so basically it just means they crossed. So that's what chiasm means. But again, you don't need to know that, it's just if you have some type of scholarly bent. So, okay, let's go to verse 3. Psalm 1, verse 3. I have to write a lot for this one. Okay. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. Let's see, and that brings forth his fruit. That brings forth his fruit in due season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatever, that is a V there, he does, that's a terrible O, shall prosper. Pretty neat. Okay. In this part here, what do you see that is parallel? Same idea that's been repeated. This one's a little tougher. Okay. So, like a tree, it's got some fruit, and, well, if it's a tree with fruit, then it's certainly a prospering tree.
What about the leaf?
Okay. Yeah, we got some leaves also in here, so good catch. That's part of the same.
And a planted tree.
Okay, so it's been planted. Good. What else? Brings forth. What else? That's true, it does. Well, here, I think we can change something then. What we can do, how about this? Whatever he does can be blue. Fruit, leaf, tree, whatever he does. It's the thing. And then we have brings forth, and in this case, prosper. Anything else in here that should be?
Shall not wither.
Shall not wither. Excellent. Anything? Yes?
All of that's bound on water.
It's true. Yeah. So we can throw in the rivers of water. If you have a tree planted by water, it's going to do good.
Yeah.
I hope so, unless it's flooded, but that's another case. Okay, good. So again, now we have 4 different lines giving the same idea. Now the nice thing is that the last line really just says it straight out. He's going to do good. Yes?
What about the contrast? Is that a style in the Hebrew poetry that it goes back and forth? Because we're seeing the evil side, the good side, the prosper.
We'll get there.
Okay.
We'll get there. This is still synonymous parallelism, where they're saying the same thing the same way. So we will get there. Okay, good job. Are you seeing the parallelism? Now, if we take our summary from the other verses, this poem would go like this. Blessed is the man who stays away from sinners. He loves God's law. Whatever he does prospers. Short. Very short. Okay. Verse 4. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff that the wind drives away. Okay. Now, you can see there is a slight shift in this verse what Holly was talking about. This is a different type of parallelism where you have a contrast. Yes. Now, the fancy scholarly theological term for this, and again, you don't need to know this, I'm just telling you what they call it. They call this antithetical. Anti-theme, basically. Opposite themed. That's how I interpret it anyway. Okay. In this case, now it's not so overt, like here you have ungodly. There's nothing in here that says ungodly particularly, but I'll just underline are or something like that, like they are. In this case, you have the not so, meaning all that stuff we just read. They are not like a tree. They do not produce fruit. They do not prosper. Instead, they are like chaff that the wind drives away. Now, you know what chaff is, correct? Huh? Yeah, it's the leftovers. Now, my father-in-law is a farmer, and they get a lot of chaff because they harvest lentils, and they have this big shaking table that the lentils will actually like crawl up, and then you have like the waste stuff sink to the bottom. It was odd. I thought it'd be in reverse. I thought the waste would go up. And they take all of that, and the good lentils, they put into their barn, or their silos, or their grain hoppers, and all the junk they feed to the cows. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm not saying the wicked get fed to cows, but I think you get the idea.
Good fiber.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So, but you can see the contrast. They are not prosperous. They're like this. They do not last forever. They get blown away. That's antithetical parallelism, the opposite. Good. Yes.
You can include with that then that the ungodly are those who do not love God's law.
Yes.
I mean, you
Yeah.
can take all of that further.
Yeah. You're correct. The ungodly are those that do not love God's law because they are not like the last three verses we saw. They make friends with the ungodly. They do not meditate in God's law, and they just don't prosper. They wither. Yes. Good. That's good. Okay. So, I'm almost questioning if we should go through the rest of the psalm because I think you're getting the idea. We might as well finish it. Okay, verse 5 says, therefore, I love the word therefore. It means logical conclusion. The ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. Please tell me, what are the parallel ideas here? We're back to synonymous again. What should I underline? Aha, ungodly and sinners. Excellent. What else should I underline? I think you're getting, shall not stand in the judgment, and what else? Yeah. Now, it's assumed that they shall not, because it says nor over here. So it obviously they're not going to be there. It's missing the verb, but you can infer that this is what it is. Good. So if you had to summarize this verse, how would you do it? Yeah. Actually, that's a really good point. If you think about, after the millennium, the wicked are all outside the city, and the congregation are all inside the city, and there is no mixing of the two. In fact, that's what God tries to prevent. He does not want them to mix together. Yeah, sure. Good job. Okay, last verse. That's verse 6. Part of the reason I like the psalm is because it's short. For the Lord, is it knoweth? Yes. Knoweth the way of the, that's a terrible T, righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. We are back to the contrasting type, the antithetical, where it says the opposite. So tell me, what are the opposite things here? Totally, okay. So the righteous and the ungodly. What else is contrasting?
Their ways.
Okay. So I can do way and way. If you don't read the rest of it, that doesn't tell you much, but we know what's going on. Anything else I should underline? I think there's one more. Yes, that's the last one. Let me get a new color for that. I hope you have green, because green is nice. Yeah, there's green here. I don't know who bought all these colored whiteboard markers, but I thank you immensely, because it's really nice. Good. So the Lord knowing and perishing. Yeah. Good job. Again, this is Hebrew poetry. Same idea, repeated in different ways. Sometimes you have the same idea multiple times. Other times you have the same structure like righteous and ungodly, way and way, Lord knoweth and perish. They're similar structure, just opposites. Yes. Yeah, in this case, this is chiastic. It does cross over in this case. You're right. So, yeah, that is poetry. Knowing this, I find, has made reading the Psalms a lot more enjoyable. Because what would happen to me before is I would read the Psalm and I would get lost. Because it's like, man, this thing's just repeating the same thing over and over. This is boring. I didn't really understand what was going on. It was repeating over and over, but for a purpose. And so when I look at the Psalm, I don't try to read everything like super in depth. You can, and it'll be a blessing. If I'm just trying to get the idea, I more just look like, okay, here's a block of text that says the same stuff. And here's another block that says the same stuff. I look for the big chunks, you could say. Yeah. And thankfully, the people that versified the Bible, that chopped it up into verses, they did a pretty good job of this. Some Psalms, I think they did a terrible job, but that's a small number. Usually, they did a great job. Good. Okay. Now, this is not just confined to the Psalms. Go with me to Isaiah chapter 1. Okay. All right. We're going to start in verse 3. So Isaiah 1, verse 3. Now, I'm going to write this out here. The ox knoweth his master. Oh, owner, sorry. I have them backwards. The ox knoweth his master, and and the ass or donkey, his master's crib. But Israel does not know. Yeah. My people doth not consider. Okay. You may not have realized this, but the book of Isaiah is almost completely written poetry. Except for the stories, I don't know why, but Isaiah was apparently a very intelligent man, because his prophecies, he turned all of them into poems. Yeah, wow. And it means a lot to me that Isaiah also has the longest prophetic book. This guy was a scholar and a writer. He didn't just... Ezekiel, he has a lot of stuff, but Ezekiel's more just like, God told me this, I saw this. It's like a transcript. But Isaiah really took the time to make it beautiful. And at the same time, kind of confusing. So, ironically. Okay, so let's take these two lines first. What is parallel between these two lines? Okay, so we have our subjects here. Those are the same. What else? Yeah, so master and owner. Okay, and I think the knoweth is implied between the two of them. How about these two lines? What's parallel here? Israel and people. My people. Good point. It's not just any people. And what else? Does not know and doth not consider. Yes. If you go through chapter 1, you can do this with basically every single verse. They're all parallel. Yeah. Now, this, for me, helps my understanding a great deal. Because now I understand, well, why does he say all this flowery stuff? It's a poem. And I can simplify it. This verse is pretty easy. Animals know me. Israel doesn't. That's the whole verse. Just said poetically.
We're lower than animals. It says basically God's people
Yeah.
have based themselves below an animal.
Yeah. And now you can get that without knowing the poetry. I just find that knowing that makes it much easier to really dig into. Okay. Now, the crown jewel, in my opinion, of all this poetry stuff is the book of Job. How many of you like the book of Job? You just love digging into it. Yeah, exactly. When I first read Job, I felt like my brain hit a brick wall. It was just dense, unintelligible, at least parts of it. God's speech in the end was a lot easier to understand. The trick with much of the book of Job, and again, whoever wrote this must have been a genius, he was a genius, it's true, is that the book of Job, all those conversations are written in poetry. Let me give you an illustration of it. Let's go to Job, chapter 28. Chapter 28. So we're in Job 28. Now I'm going to do verses 1 and 2, and you'll start to see what's going on. So I'm going to write it up here. I have my phone this time, so I can actually read. Sure. I can't even spell. Great. S-U-R-E-L-Y. There we go. Surely there is a vein for the silver and a place for gold, where they fine it. I don't know if that means refine or it does? Okay. Smelt. Okay. So finer's fire. Yeah. Okay. And then verse 2, iron is taken out of the earth, and brass is molten out of the stone. Okay. Can you see the parallelism in these two verses? Tell me what's parallel. I'll underline it.
Silver and gold.
Silver, gold. What else? Vein and place. Okay. Vein and a place. What else?
Iron and brass.
We can include iron and brass with the silver and gold. Yeah. Yeah, they're all minerals.
Earth and stone.
Earth and stone. Yeah. Taken out of the earth. Let me do this one in green. Or is it? No, actually no. Red's a good one. Red is a good one. So we have the earth and the stone. So there's a vein, there's a place, there's earth, there's a stone, and in there you find silver, gold, iron, and brass. Same thing. From the earth, you get good stuff. The thing is that the parallelism keeps going. If you continue reading the verses, for example, verse 3, it says, he sets an end to darkness and searches out all perfection, the stones of darkness and the shadow of death. It's talking about a guy in a mine shaft. He's digging through the darkness. And then it talks about, like, verse 4, the flood breaks out, okay. And then verse 5 says, as for the earth, out of it comes up bread. He's talking about basically, the earth. Verse 6, the stones of it are the place of sapphires. Hey, that sounds familiar. And it has dust of gold. That's verse 6. Verse 9, he puts out his hand upon the rock. He overturns the mountains by the roots. This whole thing, this whole section is about mining. Just kind of a visual description of it in a poem. I want you to go through, find the verse where he changes his subject. What verse is that? 12. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize these sections of verses. Because it's parallelism, all on the same topic. And Job is like the king of it. So you have verses 1 through 11. And that talks about men mine for minerals. Okay. So now we have, starting in verse 12, he changes his subject. What is the subject that he changes to? What about it? Yeah. Good, yeah. So, where can you get wisdom? Okay. Now, from verse 12, start reading and find where he changes subject again. It's going to be a few verses. Oh no, where he changes the subject completely. Yeah.
So he's unraveling or contrasting all the places you get metals and you don't get wisdom in those places.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite a few verses. He spends some time on this.
So he's answering that with verse 23.
Verse 20.
God understands.
Ah, you found it. So this section is 12 or 11, verse 23 is where it changes. he spends 11 verses about this one idea. He just says it a whole bunch of different ways. Again, the idea with Hebrew poetry is that you get one idea said in a lot of different forms. But it's still just one idea. Okay, so from verse 23, and what is the subject of verse 23? What's the subject of it? God. God what? God knows wisdom. Okay, and where does that section end? 28. Yeah, basically the rest of the chapter.
And then he tells you what wisdom is.
Yeah, that's true. So, here, let's do 27 and then verse 28. The fear of the Lord is wisdom. Great. You can take literally 28 verses and summarize them in 4 sentences. Yes?
Back up here at the first, it says, where they find it. Does that not mean that for the whole thing, you have to search for the wisdom? And that would be part of finding it, where they find it. It means that you have to search all the way through to find the wisdom and stuff that God's talking about.
You're talking about this section here where he's like, well, where can you find wisdom? Which section? I'm sorry.
Back in 1.
Okay.
Job 1, it says, surely there is a vein of silver and a place for gold, where they find it. In other words, you've got to search for it.
Now, she was saying that the word fine is refine. Yeah. And hold on, I can actually verify that because I have the Hebrew here. To purify, distill, strain, refine, to purge, to purify. Okay, so it's actually, purification process. So it's not hard to make that mistake because I was looking at like, well, do they mean that, do they give you a ticket, you know? Do they fine you? Yeah, English is kind of funny that way. Good. So, to me, this is the secret to reading Job. It's a giant poem. And they spend literally sometimes 10 or more verses talking about the same idea repeatedly. And I'm just like, you know what? I know what you're talking about. I'm just going to skip to where you talk about something different. And once you do that, the subject of this chapter is really powerful. You know, we try all kinds of ways. You know, we can do lots of neat stuff. We search for things, but we can't find wisdom. In fact, I love one of the verses in there, just makes me laugh because the person goes to all these different places and he can't find it, he can't buy it. And then in verse 22 it says, destruction and death say, we've heard about it. It's like, you know, I think I heard a rumor about it somewhere, but I don't know where it is.
What about verse 14?
Verse 14, the depth saith, it's not in me. The sea is like, I don't have it. Yeah. So once you understand this context, then all those verses actually become very interesting. Because it's like, oh, well, that's what it's talking about. He even plays like some jokes almost. So it's fascinating stuff. Okay, so we're out of time for poetry, but I hope you get the idea. Yeah, it helps a great deal when you tackle things like Isaiah, Job, Psalms, and actually you'll see poems scattered throughout the Bible. I trip over them all the time. So I hope that helps your process.
So where else are you saying the poems are?
Oh my God. Let's go to Luke chapter 1. Luke.
I guess they're all through,
Yeah.
in the life of David, I guess there's poems.
Yeah. So you go to Luke chapter 1, and You go to verse 47. I'm sorry, 46. Luke 1, 46 and 47. And it says, Mary said, "My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior." Do you see the parallel there? My soul and my spirit compared to magnifying the Lord and rejoicing in God. Her prophecy about Jesus, really, she was saying a poem when she did it. And so you find these scattered everywhere. I can't just give you hey, this is where the poetry is. Although obviously the Psalms and the Proverbs, those are the big ones. Yes?
Do you think that Mary made a song out of it?
I would think so, because usually, like the Psalms, well, they were sung. And I didn't show you this, but if you go to Genesis chapter 1, when God is speaking to, actually himself, he says, "Let us make man in our image and according to our likeness." God was the first poet. And usually when God speaks, he speaks in poetry. You go to, when he curses the snake, he says, "You are cursed above every creature and above every beast of the field." The parallelism there. "I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain shall you bring forth children." That's a parallel phrase. And it's kind of interesting that God is cursing Adam and Eve in poetry. Yeah, or at least he's telling what he's going to do. So God's the one that did it first. I would not be surprised if God gave Mary a poem or a song.
It just seemed like she would. She was so happy.
Yeah.
Sometimes children make up little songs, when
I think you could make a good argument for it being a song. Yes?
So then in the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses says he gave this song recounting history to the Israelites,
Yeah.
several chapters, I think, in Deuteronomy, then we should, anywhere it says song, we should study it like this, is what you're saying?
It's good to at least be aware of it.
Or it's a clue?
Yeah. And again, it's not so much like finding something specific. It just helps you deal with the repetition and understand, well, this is why it's repeating. It's just giving the same idea. Okay. For the last session, I want to practice something, but I'm wondering if any of you have some particular chapter or something that you'd like to tackle together. Because, I have ideas, but maybe one of you has something that you would like to do.
On what topic or what?
I'm not going to restrict it. Whatever you wish. It's true. If you're into that kind of thing, we could dive into one of those. It's true.
We just spent a week looking at Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and it seems like Genesis 1 and 2 would be really interesting study.
Okay.
But I'm just throwing that in the mix.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. We can make a pot out of this. Here. Let's make a pot of stew. I'm just going to write ideas on the board. Okay, so we have ideas. Revelation. Something. We have Genesis 1 and 2. That's an idea.
What about the nutshell of Daniel 11?
Nutshell of, like summarizing the whole thing?
Like when you looked at those other prophecies last time to see what kind of a prophecy is this?
Ah.
What would be the main points? I guess
Okay.
combining the poetry and the other to kind of see where you can condense the thought.
I don't think Daniel 11 is poetic, actually. But it is prophetic, obviously. What's that? Okay, sorry.
Maybe that's too much to bite off.
Revelation 14, actually.
Okay, so potentially 14. Any particular segment of it, or Just the whole thing is good.
Specifically the three angels' messages that we understood.
Okay, so 3. Any other suggestions here? I don't want to limit it just to like prophecy and such. Yes? Numbers 14. I have no idea what it is, but I'll put it on the list. Numbers 14. Okay, I got to look this up because I just want to see. Oh my, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's an exciting one. Okay. Any other suggestions?
Teaching a friend something that would be helpful. So what are the,
I'm in number 16, I'm sorry.
Oh.
yeah, we're sold on
Okay, I'll put comma 16.
Okay. She said 1 Corinthians 13.
Okay. First. We haven't dealt with Paul, but there are some methods that can help with him.
Oh, that would be good.
I don't usually teach that segment, but we
Crash
could,
course on Paul.
yeah, crash course indeed. Hopefully don't crash, yeah. So, any other suggestions?
How about Colossians, what is that? Where it talks about Jesus nailing
Colossians 2,
to
yeah, like 14 through 16, that whole contentious thing.
Isaiah 53.
Isaiah 53. Okay. I think we have a pretty good list. Okay. We need a break. Your brains need a break. My brain needs a break. And my mouth needs some water. So let's come back in 10 minutes. Think about what you'd like to do. We'll vote on it then, and we'll do whatever we can with the time that we have. Again, it's going to be short because any one of these could take probably hours, and we don't have hours, we have minutes. So 50-ish minutes. Okay, yep, come back when you're ready, and we'll get started in about 10 minutes.